Hey, everybody, it's Ken Wetmore here with your favorite podcast. Yeah, I know it is your favorite. So thanks for tuning in. In the studio recording with me today, I have to my right the esteemed Dr. Melanie Bockmann. And then we have also Lucas. So,
yeah, I guess it's better just say that.
I don't know. Lucas has control of the board, though, so I don't know. He can add all kinds of sound effects. He might be the one who's
and I am totally fine with that. I really am. So, Randy is taking a well-deserved break. He is off doing a Harley, riding around on his Harley. I actually talked to somebody who he had been out riding with yesterday. I was in a meeting with him. They'd spent most of the day riding with him. I think he drove up back roads to Daytona and back yesterday with, I think his dad and brother are here. Mm-hmm. They're riding motorcycles with together. So if you're out on the road, please be careful. Pay attention to those motorcycles, and look in your rear view mirrors and be kind and polite, because we want Randy back all in one piece. So
That's right.
Sure we do.
And we care about all the other people riding motorcycles as well. So so if you do see Randy, go ahead and wave and let him know how much you appreciate him, because you don't know what back road you might see him on here. So
That's right.
Anyway, I think I said my name's Ken Wetmore. I did. All right, there we go. Check that off. So we're really super glad to have you here on the podcast listening this morning. We want to go ahead and I say morning, but who knows what time it is where you're at. For us, it's morning. It's right about 7:39 on a beautiful Tuesday morning here in Central Florida. The weather's nice. Just going back to my news background.
I know.
I just have to revert.
He's very chipper this morning.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is our podcast where we break down the sermon, we talk about it, which feels a little weird to be hosting it and trying to tell you about it. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to make Melanie explain the sermon. I'll act as a true host, and she's going to have to do it from my perspective, which is going to be even more fun for you. So, or Lucas, would you prefer to do that?
Oh, Melanie can handle it. Yeah.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I know. This feels like your moment, Lucas.
Oh, I don't think so.
All right. Well, Lucas, at least here's what we're going to do. I know that you were in church because I saw you in first service sitting with your wonderful wife.
Yes.
So that's great. And so tell me, what was the sermon about this week?
The sermon was about the hand. So we had a beautiful introduction with Belshazzar. It was amazing. I loved that.
He was great, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So if you haven't watched the service, or if you're just kind of tuning in for the first time, we often will introduce some kind of creative elements into our church service. And so, Melanie, tell everybody what we've been doing for the last couple of weeks in case they haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, the last few weeks, the intros to the sermon have been speeches by some of the major kings that are represented either in Daniel or just barely prior to Daniel. So we've had Hezekiah, and we've had 3 weeks of Nebedcunezzer, and this past week we had Belshazzar.
So we must really have a huge budget to pay such incredible actors, because, I mean, these are where do you find them? Do you go to Central Casting? Because this is incredible. I mean, they've all been ridiculously good.
Yeah, we have some really talented people here, and fortunately they were within budget, but I'm going to quadruple what I paid them this time for their next performance. No, we have great volunteers who are very talented who are happy to step up.
Let's do a shout out to the people who have been on so far. All right, so Melanie, tell me who are our kings this that we've had so far.
So our first king was Hezekiah, and that was played by Ken Bradley, who is uniquely qualified to play a politician, given his experience.
Yes, indeed. Mayor of Winter Park.
Yes.
And then our second king was?
Razan Maxon, who was not a politician, but he pulled it off very well.
Good job, Razan.
Yes.
You are fantastic. And remind me to come back to Razan here in a moment, because he also did something super cool this week that I definitely want to take a moment to talk about. But this week's king was? This week's king was
Stevie Collins.
Playing?
Belshazzar.
Yes. And man, all three of these gentlemen have just really done an amazing job. They've been incredible.
Yeah, although Stevie was a little offended that we chose him for Belshazzar. So I don't know. I guess we apologize to him and we thank him for his amazing performance.
I think he's not listening to the podcast anyway, so we'll just go ahead and we'll let him know that we really thought he was awesome. And we just thought that he could pull it off.
Yeah, absolutely. And he did.
And he absolutely did.
We were right.
We were right. And so we have one more king coming up. We won't say who the king's going to be played by, but the next king will be
Darius.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Those performances have always come right before the sermon, so they've been just a really nice lead-in. And I really do think I think all three gentlemen really kind of pulled off the characters and gave people maybe something to think about what those kings might have been like. Because we've kind of played it a little bit of a modern take on it, so it hasn't been like kind of like when I was growing up, where they dress up in the robes and the stuff, sashes. And they come out and talk in King James and whatever. There have been references to modern things that would have obviously not been there, but we're just trying to put it in people's context today. So that's been fun. So let's take a minute, time out, side tangent to talk about Razan. He and his friends and family.
The Maxon crew.
The Maxon crew, as we like to call them around here, did a phenomenal job pulling off what we called a feast for a feast this last Saturday afternoon, and it was a amazing event. So I have to tell you, Razan has been after me for I don't know how long. He said, Ken, we sponsor all these World Vision kids down in Guatemala, and I believe right now, when I talk to the World Vision person, at one point, we were at 187. I think it's, over the course of 3 years, people will, they won't always continue on with that sponsorship. And so right now, I think we're at about 140 something. But still, 140 kids being sponsored in Guatemala by folks who are friends of or part of the Whole Life family here. Mm-hmm. And so Razan early on, probably 3 years ago, said, hey, so we're going to get together. We're going to do some stuff. We're going to talk about our kids, right? And I was like, yeah, sure, Razan, we're going to do that. And so 3 years later, here we are. And so Razan finally kind of took matters into his own. He said, Ken, I'm going to need some help from you, but I'm going to do this. We're going to make this happen. And his vision has been to again create community amongst the people who are sponsoring kids in Guatemala here at Whole Life. And then the other part that he wanted to do is kind of let the families and children that we're sponsoring down in Guatemala know that we love them and care about them, mm-hmm. and that we're thinking about them, and maybe do something special for them around the holidays. And so the idea of a feast for a feast was that he wanted to get everybody together, have that conversation, and then raise some money for a special holiday gift for the communities in which we are sponsoring kids. And one possibility was to give them enough money that they maybe could have a special Christmas celebration of their own there. And so we had a feast for a feast. And I don't know how much money at this point. I haven't had a chance to sit down with our finance people to look at how much money came in over the weekend. I have a rough idea of how much cash and checks came in. But I know that a lot more money came in through our app and through our online giving portal because we had a QR code that people could use. And the goal was to raise $4,000, which, will go a long, long way towards helping that community. And one of the cool things about it is that the money comes into Whole Life, and then what we do is we write a check to World Vision for the communities that we are sponsoring children in. And then those communities decide what the best way is to bless that community. Because we originally said, we think we want to go ahead and get some cows and goats and chickens, and because World Vision has these packages where you can mm-hmm. do that. Yeah. And World Vision is so awesome. They're so nice. And they came back and they said, well, hey, would you be a little bit more open to us giving us a little bit more latitude? Because we talked to the area supervisor in those areas, and right now, that's not what they need. The people aren't ready for that particular kind of gift. If we gave it to them, it would be there and gone. And World Vision, and one of the things I am so in love with them over, is that they're all about sustainability. It's not about a Band-Aid approach or just doing a good thing and then kind of moving on. It's really about helping that thing create sustainability mm-hmm. and long-term impact. Their goal for World Vision is not to stay in a region more than 20 years. Their goal is to, over the course of 10 to 20 years, to help that community get on its feet to where they're self-sustaining and they can move on, and the cycle of poverty is broken, and then they move to a new community and continue that process. And so when they were communicating with us, they said, hey guys, look, and where we're at right now, that's probably not what's going to be best, but if you trust us and believe in us, would you give us the latitude to do what we think is best? And we definitely hear what you're saying, that you'd like to have a feast, and that create an opportunity for them to have a get together, and if we can make it happen, we will. But we just want the latitude to be able to do what's best. And of course,
that makes so much more sense than for us to try to figure out from here.
It's so many times,
what
right?
they need. Let them tell us what they need.
Exactly. And I think so many times in life when we try to do good, we try to do it on our own terms, and it's not really what's best for the other person. It's more about what's best for us. So it's one of the things I love about World Vision is they really think through that. And I appreciated them kind of just gently saying, hey guys, we see what you want to do, and we hear that. Here's what would really be most impactful. And of course, our team was like, yeah, of course, that's fantastic. Let's definitely do that. So super excited. Like I said, I don't know how much money's come in. We'll hopefully tally that up here in the next day or two. And I know Razan's going to be sending out an email to all the sponsors, letting them know where we're at. And if we've hit our goal or if we're a little bit below it, I kind of feel like we probably hit the goal, but it'd be sure fun to exceed that goal. So that would feel pretty good too. So that's Razan, who is Nebedcunezzer, doing good. See, his life has been reformed, and he's doing good. He and his crew. And Cecilia, I hear you. I hear you laughing there. I hear you right through my earbuds here. So anyway, so thanks to them for that. Back to the sermon series. As Lucas so correctly said, yes, we are talking about Daniel chapter 5, the bloodless hand that writes on the wall for Belshazzar. And so this week we're just kind of taking that story apart. And really, I think out of all of Daniel, this may be my favorite chapter because there's so much going on in there. And we talked a little bit about that in the sermon. We talked about some of the things, and I had several people come up to me afterwards and say, I never heard that the Babylonians counted their casualties by the severed hands of their enemies, how that plays into what God's doing, the kind of God's sense of humor. If you ever need to prove to somebody that God has a sense of humor, this is one of those places where you can, where to me it's just my kind of humor, that dry humor is like, yes.
You hope it was dry. Anyway,
yes, indeed. Well, that would be the bloodless hand.
Oh, there we go. Okay, yes, thank you.
There we go.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and talk, though, a little bit, Melanie and Lucas. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this chapter and where it plays in. Historians think that this probably happened, I think that it was about, we talked about the week before that the week chapter 4 happened about 20 years after chapter 3. Melanie, you may have more research than I do on this, but my research on it was that chapter 5 comes about 20 to 30 years after chapter 4.
Well, it depends on who you ask.
There we go. So let's talk about that a little bit, though, because and that's a little bit of what Melanie's going to talk to. What we're going to talk about with Melanie is that, again, there's this controversy over whether Daniel is a book that was kind of put together by various editors who kind of took various stories and then kind of put them together in an order that kind of made a point that they were trying to make, or whether this was really Daniel writing out, his greatest hits, if you will. That he kind of says, okay, here's the stories I really want you to know. There's chapter 1 where we go into captivity and we don't eat the food, and then there's chapter 2 where I interpret this dream, and then there's chapter 3 where my buddies get thrown into a fiery furnace, and then there's chapter 4 where there's the where Nebedcunezzer goes insane, and I interpret a dream correctly there as well, and then we get to chapter 5 where we have the overthrow of Babylon, where Belshazzar loses Babylon, and then chapter 6 gets into what comes after that in the lion's den and all that good stuff, which we're going to talk about next week.
And then major existential crisis for the next few chapters.
Yeah, and then we get into the dreams, the prophecy, the prophetic part of Daniel. So Melanie, go ahead and share a little bit for people who are maybe this is the first time they've been introduced to the idea, they've never heard, maybe they've always just heard that Daniel was written by Daniel. So give them a little bit of what might surprise them if they are walking around in the academic circles that you've been in. Because I think it's important, and we're not here trying to sow doubt or anything, but I think that sometimes when you don't know the rest of the story and what other people are talking about, it can sometimes really take you off guard when a well-researched person goes, well, that's nice, but you are not considering all these other aspects and the things that we know about this and that we believe. And I don't think it takes away from faith. For me, it's actually very helpful, because I think it can really actually hurt your faith when all you ever hear is the one side of the story and you're kind of sheltered from the other side. And then when you hear it, you're like, well, wait a minute, can I actually trust people who didn't trust me to be a smart enough person to make sense of things? So, Melanie, talk a little bit about maybe the other side of it would definitely be the other side of what I believe, my personal belief system. But talk a little bit about what academics sometimes, a lot of times, talk about when they talk about Daniel outside of maybe Seventh-day Adventist or maybe even some traditional evangelical circles.
Sure. So a lot of scholars, there are conservative scholars that will say, Daniel authored the book of Daniel. Most scholars will say that Daniel didn't author it necessarily. He was the main character of it. And the reason why they think that is because there are some segmented portions that would make sense for that time, that they are separate court tales that were then put together into the book of Daniel, with Daniel as the main hero. Some scholars say, did Daniel actually exist as a person? Because it's very possible that Daniel just emerged as a legendary figure and then the stories were attributed to him. There are other reasons why they think this, because there are stories that are attributed to Nebedcunezzer that it seems much more likely that they happened to Nabonidus, or Nabonidus, however you would like to say it.
We'll just go with whatever you say. I don't pronounce anything correctly. So.
We're going with it. Some of the stories then are connected with secular history, in that, whereas in Daniel it looks like it's happening to Nebedcunezzer, but in secular history it looks like it's actually happening to Nabonidus. And then there are some characters that show up in a way that is not that doesn't match up with the rest of history. So, for example, Belshazzar is listed as king in the book of Daniel, and he actually wasn't king; he was the regent of his father, the king. And then nobody really knows who Darius the Mede is. No, he's not recorded anywhere in secular history. It just goes straight into Cyrus being the next ruler. So there are just questions that make people think, okay, well, maybe this wasn't written at the time of Daniel. Maybe this was written a while later when people's memories were a little bit fuzzy and they were trying to remember, oh, yeah, that guy Belshazzar, he was in charge, King Belshazzar, when he was really the regent or something like that.
So Darius isn't mentioned, because I thought Herodotus, or I never say his, again, forgive me for my poor pronunciation of names.
We can call him whatever he wants. He's long dead.
Herodutus or something like that. I thought that he did mention Darius in one of his accounts. No?
So there is Darius the Persian.
Okay. But not the Mede. Yeah. Okay. And so some scholars will say, okay, we get that there is a Darius the Persian, but we don't see a Mede in that sense, because the Bible records him as Darius the Mede.
Well, the problem is chronology.
Okay.
So, in other parts of the Bible, and I wish I could remember off the top of my head, just small disclaimer here, I am not a biblical studies scholar. There, I put that out there. So please double check what I say. No, Darius the Persian is listed as the son of Ahasuerus or Xerxes.
Okay.
And so the timeline doesn't match up.
Sure. And Xerxes would have been more around the time of Esther.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. These are all fascinating things, and it kind of goes to a little bit of one of the points that I brought out. And one of the reasons why I have faith in the Daniel account is from my admittedly less scholarly point of view. It feels to me like oftentimes there will be, well, history says this, and then later on you go, oh, well, as we dig deeper, we find new things. Oh, wait, the Bible does have a point here, and particularly the point that I made today or on Saturday about the Nebedcunezzer cylinder that was found, because up until the 1850s, there was no historical record that could be found of Belshazzar. And then we find this cylinder that undisputably came from Nebedcunezzer, and in it mentions Belshazzar. And in the sermon I didn't read the quote, but I'll read it to you as it's translated. On the cylinder it says, "As for me, Nebedcunezzer, king of Babylon, save me from sinning against your great Godhead, and grant me a present, a life long of days. And as for Belshazzar, the eldest son, my offspring, instill reverence for your great Godhead in his heart, and may he not commit any cultic mistakes." I guess that prayer wasn't answered. "And may he be sated with a life of plenitude." And so that's kind of a translation of what's on that cylinder, and this part of that cylinder. There's a lot more on there. In fact, I do believe it actually recounts that he left his eldest son Belshazzar as co-regent, and so, for me that's another piece of evidence for me, because it feels like with Belshazzar, he definitely falls off of the historical map pretty quickly after the fall of Babylon, which really kind of makes sense that you kind of erase the people that have really messed up history in a significant way.
Except that the fall of Babylon is recorded in the Babylonian Chronicles. Mm-hmm. And so it's recorded in 5 different places, including Herodotus and Xenophon. Of course, they came much later, right. 75 years or something later. But I guess, so tell me this piece. It sounds like it's really important to you that Daniel was written by Daniel.
I think it's important to me. I think for especially the chapters we're not going to be spending as much time on, the prophetic ones, yeah, I'd say it is probably pretty important that it came from Daniel.
So do you think? So this is a question, because I mean, everybody reads with an intention,
sure,
right? And so there's an element of confirmation bias, an element of rationalization,
sure,
that happens no matter who's reading it, or whatever your purpose is. But if you need Daniel to have written the book of Daniel in order to support your eschatology, then if you find out that, wait, maybe Daniel didn't write it, and your eschatology starts falling apart, then you're going to be more likely to read history and find evidence that confirms that Daniel wrote the book of Daniel, right?
Sure.
So I think the thing so it depends on how you're approaching it, I guess, and why it's important to you. To me, it's not important whether or not he wrote the book of Daniel. I think there's value in it either way. But I have, I guess, how do I say this? I like to hold things loosely enough that if I encounter something that falsifies something that I thought I believed, it doesn't destroy my world. Or if I encounter something that adds a layer of something that I didn't know, I can accept that layer without everything crumbling. And so I think if your belief is driving the reading of the text rather than the text driving the relief or the belief. I mean, that's a different approach and a different angle.
But isn't it, I mean, but wouldn't we both agree that your belief always influences the way you read the text?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, so whether you are coming at it from the viewpoint that I would probably be coming at it from, that, you know, this is inspired word of God, or if you're coming from let's talk about the most secular way you could come at it, is that this is the compilations of ancient people that are not inspired. It's just these are the sacred texts that they've chosen to make sacred, and they've kind of put them all together. Either way, you're coming at it from a bias and a perspective.
Right. But if you have, so for example, if it were my pet project to try to prove that it wasn't a sacred text,
right,
then of course I'm going to read it with the opposite confirmation bias.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that maybe there's somewhere in the middle that it still allows you to explore for whatever the truth is, without being, without feeling like you're trying to prove something about it.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. I think what for me becomes a little bit problematic in my own journey, and what I try to figure out is that if I come at, from my perspective, if I come at this as, if I hold super loosely to it, then what does that say about whether God inspired the Bible or not? And that's the part that I think is problematic for me. I guess I don't really. For me, it's not necessarily problematic that there's not a Daniel, or there was or wasn't, as much as the real problem for me is there a God that really cares enough to speak into humanity, and to that cares about us enough to leave us some clues about what God wants, what's going to happen, that maybe God is in control. And I think that's probably one of the things, like I said, that for me definitely leads me towards the confirmation bias that you talked about. And I think I want to be able to own that I definitely err in that direction, because I err in the direction of believing that there is a God that genuinely cares about me, and that cares enough to have left me a record of how he's intervened in the past, and that record is there to give me hope that he intervenes in the current and is a part of that. And so I don't know. Does that make sense, Melanie?
Yeah, it does. And I just say that there are lots of different ways to look at inspiration. And so the possibility that Daniel might have been authored by someone else, or many someones, doesn't necessarily negate the possibility of inspiration. Because, some people think of inspiration as, the Holy Spirit possesses someone and moves their hand and writes the actual words on the page. Other people think inspiration is, God speaking to you and then you writing down what you heard. Other people think, well, God is in your life and you are a Spirit-inspired person, so that's how the writing becomes inspired. And so I guess the question then is, how did God inspire? What were the clues maybe that could be left by someone who was inspired by God to leave, and do they have to match up with a post-Enlightenment understanding of historical record?
I have a question. So if it was critical for us to know who the author was, wouldn't God allow that to be very clear for us to understand in the first place? Because for me personally, it seems that if that is not clear, maybe it's not the point for us to figure out who the author was, but trying to find other lessons that we can learn from the book. Yeah.
That's a good point, Lucas. I like that. And that you make a good point. And in the book of Daniel doesn't... I don't believe it starts off by saying, I, Daniel, write these words unto thee.
No, it doesn't actually say who authored the book.
Yeah. For me, I think one of the fun things in life is to think about these ideas and to discuss them and to be open to them. And I remember one of the frustrations for me in some of the theology classes that I was a part of was a less than openness to having a critical discussion about these things and to own that there are other ideas out there and opinions on that. And that can be really limiting when you only have straw man conversations where you kind of set up the other side's case in a very weak way so that you seem to topple it over when there's a lot of other evidence that's not straw, that's pretty tough to look at and understand. And for me, I do worry sometimes that our faith is being built on sand rather than on a foundation where we say, well, I can believe as long as I'm not exposed to other ideas and other things. And rather than saying, look, there are some challenging questions about the book of Daniel. There just are. And we can talk about that. And we can agree that people may see things differently. And it could be even that Melanie and I can look at this topic, and Lucas, let's just use all three of us, that all three of us could look at this book in three different ways and still love God and still have faith in God and still have a walk with God. And it's just simply a way of doing things. I remember, having a conversation with somebody I considered incredibly intelligent who was a part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church and had a different opinion on the creation story in Genesis. They saw their opinion was that it wasn't a 6 literal day creation, that it was over ages. And so we kind of went back and forth for a while on this because I'm in the 6-day literal creation camp. And he presented some really fascinating things to think about. And at the end I was like, well, but how can you be a Seventh-day Adventist? And he shared some really fascinating reasons why he is and why he feels that he can be a Seventh-day Adventist. He talked about, I think, Ezekiel, where it talks about celebrating the Sabbath in heaven. And he said, well, so for me, it doesn't rely on a 6 literal day of creation as much as it is I see in Ezekiel that we're still doing it in heaven. So I can say, well, then let's do it. And I'd never seen that perspective before. Did it change my mind? It really didn't, as far as what I believe, but it opened my mind to other people and seeing other people. And I think so often we will take people who think something different than we do, and we will paint them into the heretic box. We will say, oh, you don't really love Jesus. You don't really care about truth. You don't care about the Bible. And I think the opposite is often very true. People deeply care about the truth, and that's their process of looking through things. And that's one of the things that I love about the early Seventh-day Adventist Church is that really everything was out on the table to discuss, to work through, and to really go, hey, well, we've all been going to church on Sunday. Why have we been doing that? And they had a conversation about it. And then the early Seventh-day Adventist Church, well, what about that Trinity stuff that we've been, and we had very strong early pioneers who took a anti-Trinitarian viewpoint, which is not where the church ended up. It's certainly not where I'm at. I believe in the Trinity. For me, it really does matter pretty deeply to my concept of salvation and what God's doing through Jesus. And yet, the early church was comfortable enough to have that conversation and to allow those people to be a part of, we so often hear people saying, well, if you don't believe what the church believes, then get out. And I find that sad.
Yeah, definitely.
I find it sad that that's not how we started off. What if we said, you don't believe what I believe? Let's continue talking. Let's keep the conversation going. Maybe one of us will change. Maybe neither of us will change. But let's keep the conversation going, because Jesus' prayer in John matters to us, that they may be one as you and I are one. And I don't know that oneness here on earth means that we are all in agreement on everything. I do think that it means that we love one another as Christ has loved us. So,
well, I think the conversation part is the important part, because if all we're after is answers, then we can find an answer, arrive at it, and we can stop thinking. We can just relax now because we've got the answer. And I don't think that's how we were. I don't think that's how we were created. I think that God gave us brains for a reason, And I think if you look at the history of how people have interacted with the text way before Christians ever came around, it was not, it was a much more open dialogue, I think, than sometimes we allow it to be. Especially after, the early 20th century, when the liberal modernist theologians were making a mess of things, and Darwin had come along and introduced evolution, and higher criticism of the Bible came into play. And a group of conservative Protestants said, "Hey, we need to establish what are the actual basic fundamentals of our faith." And so they wrote a several booklet series outlining, well, here's basically what you have to believe of the fundamentals in order to be, part of this group. And I think since that time, even though those people at that time wore the badge of fundamentalist very proudly, but it kind of lost steam over time. And so it has morphed, but people still will look at a particular set of beliefs and say, this is what we have to believe. And so therefore, no matter what we find out, no matter what the history says, no matter what additional things are uncovered in archaeology, we have to defend these particular things. And I think sometimes people arrive at those answers because someone gives them the answers. And they're not even really sure how they got to the answers. And they need help defending the answers, but those are their answers to defend. And my thing is, why can't we open things up to conversation? We may all end up in the same place. We may not all end up in the same place, but we are experiencing the living and active part of the things of God, of thinking about the things of God. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah, and I think that to a little bit further to your point, I mean, if we want to go ahead and make it a little less personal and go back, several hundred years, when many within the Christian faith believed that the world was flat, and I know that's making a comeback. So, but many in the Christian world believed that the world was flat, and they used biblical. Well, the Bible says, a plain reading of the Bible says the earth is flat. Here's the four corners, blah blah blah, and they had all these texts. Well, then science comes along, space travel comes along, and it's pretty clear the world. Well, at least to me, it's pretty clear the world is, having been on a plane and seeing the curvature myself from pretty up high, seems pretty plain, but. And so that can be, the church is like, well, no, or people within the church, no, it's flat. It has to be because that's what the Bible says. Well, is that really what the Bible says? Because there's other parts in the Bible that also talk about a sphere, that talk about and so a lot of times I think we defend positions saying, oh, this is what the Bible says, and we're saying, and to your point, Melanie, we're reading into what the Bible is saying, and we're ignoring other parts of the Bible that say other things that are different than that, and we just take the text that we have and say, well, no, but this text says that, and we don't put it in the totality of the Bible as a whole, and so that can be one of the problems with the Bible and holding on to things that to the point you were trying to make with me a little bit earlier, is like, well, it seems really important to you that it was written by Daniel. And for me, I don't know that anything's changed in the last 20 minutes, but it is important to me that it was written by Daniel, that he was a historical figure. I don't think it's going to change my faith if I get to heaven and find out there was no Daniel and I'm wandering around looking. I don't think it's going to be like, oh, God, I don't know if I want to be here or not.
A lot of little kids are going to be disappointed because they want to ask about the lions. But
of course.
I guess we'll have to muddle on.
On the other hand, but to me, at the place that I'm at, the evidence that I do consider important, to me it makes sense that there was a Daniel. Whether he necessarily compiled the whole book himself, less important. But
well, I think I spent so much of my life. You know what? I have read the Bible since I was when I was sounding out words. I was doing it in my little tiny King James Bible with a picture of Jesus and children on the front of it. And I I used to challenge my friends. We used to see how much we could memorize. I remember a friend of mine when we were 6th grade. We were racing to see who could memorize Revelation 13. We were really strange kids. But
those pastors' kids.
I know, right? So I think that there may be people who listen to me sometimes talk about the Bible and talk about the background of the history of the Bible, or talk about the places where it lacks coherence or where it contradicts itself, and think, oh, well, she must hate this book. No, I love this book. If you come into my office, you will see floor to ceiling. I have commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries. I love this book. But what I have figured out over the course of my studies, and I had to go through a major existential crisis to get to this place, but what I've figured out is, for the longest time, I felt like I had to defend it. I felt like I had to explain why it was a good record of history, or explain,
the Nebedcunezzer approach of believe this, or I'll have you torn to pieces. Yeah.
Or explore or defend God for, why would God command the Israelites to kill all these people, but save the virgins? And the amount of ridiculous rationalizations and explanations that you come up with to try to defend a text, because you have to believe that every word is inspired of God, it's exhausting. But I think at some point, if you can look at the Bible and let it be what it is, it doesn't have to be a perfect record of history, because that's not what it was ever intended to be. It doesn't have to be an explanation of all the scientific, mysteries of the universe. That's never what it was intended to be. These are stories of people who are writing down their experiences and what they perceive to be their interactions with God, and what they understood about God at that time. And you can look at the progression over time of how people have interacted, with God, with other people, with previous texts, and you can see how this is just a fascinating progression. But if you try to expect it to be something that it's not, I feel like we either have to put ourselves in some kind of painful contortion, or we just say, oh, well, forget the whole thing. None of it must be right then, and just get rid of it.
Which is not a good thing.
Which is not a good thing. Yeah. I think you lose out on so much richness and so much possibility when you just throw it out.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and jump back a little bit into Daniel chapter 5. Was there anything, Lucas or Melanie, that you wanted to touch on at all from this sermon when it comes to Daniel chapter 5, or that wasn't touched on in the sermon that you wanted to point out?
Well, you and I talked about that the researcher that you found that was looking at the different ways that the meeny tekel upharsin
yes
could be rearranged. I actually did find some additional information on that was
why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Supportive of. Well, no, you need to explain it, because you were the one that was super excited about it. But I was saying I haven't seen that before. So but I did find some other stuff that was in that vein. So basically,
the researcher that I came across, let's see if I can give you his name. His name is James Bejon. The last name is spelled Bejon. And he wrote a article that was put, I think, on academia.com academia.edu.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful to mention, he's a researcher. He's not presenting as a scholar. He works for, I think, Tyndale Publishing, and he's working on a degree currently. But this is
from
is
Oxford,
an area
right?
of Cambridge.
Cambridge, okay.
Yeah.
And he put out a piece of work called Meany, Tekel, and Parson, Interpretation by Numbers. And I'll just kind of read you a quick excerpt from his summary. He says, Daniel's solution to the riddle inscribed on Belshazzar's wall is analytically elegant and prophetically accurate. It's also a lot more involved than it seems. Daniel decomposes the king's riddle into 3 trilateral nouns, Meany, Tekel, and Peres, which form the basis of his solution. He begins the first line of his solution with the word mene, the second with tekel, and the third with peres. But why is decomposition necessary? If God's message to Belshazzar could have been summed up in 3 trilateral nouns, then why doesn't the Masoretic text simply have God inscribe the letters that were on the wall on Belshazzar's wall? Why do we instead find parson, the plural of Peres, in the King's Riddle, yet Peres is in its solution? Anyway, so that's very clear to you all now. But basically,
if you're still listening.
Yeah. But basically what he points out is that there's just a number of places in the book of Daniel, and particularly in chapter 5, where pairs of 3, or I shouldn't say pairs because pairs 2, so threes, trilaterals come in. So, for instance, there are 3 places in Daniel 5 where it talks about gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, neither see nor hear nor know. There's these different places where what's being given glory to the gods is mentioned. Anyway, read the article. But it's a fascinating look at this, the way that the riddle is broken down. The words can the words that are used can be either nouns or verbs, and Daniel actually uses them as both in his solution, according to this gentleman. And I think in some other places that I looked too, that basically these words are used as verbs and nouns, which is kind of a unique thing to this. And Daniel takes these words and he definitely has to add meaning to them. In other words, if he just said, here's what the words mean, Belshazzar, it means weight, divided, and it wouldn't have had, there would have been no interpretation. It would have just been, well, these are the words. And so Daniel adds interpretation to what these things mean. And there's some just super fascinating ways that they line up in the way that they go about doing things.
Yeah, there are different scholars have come up with multiple ways that these words could have been in a riddle, which would have prevented the sages at the time to be able to decipher them.
Yeah. And so, this gentleman kind of goes through and shows a lot of what he found to be significant in the way that these words break down, and it's pretty intricate. And he's not the only one who's really taken this apart. You can find other people who have done a lot of work on these particular words, and it is fascinating because it's. Again, I think it's one of those simplifications where we tend to take the childhood story, which is good and important, and we kind of keep it in the simple stage and don't always research it further and see the deeper things that are going in there. For instance, for me, one of the fascinating things is that last word, the consonants that are there can also make the word Persian in Aramaic, and so why that's important is because when Daniel says the word means divided, but your kingdom is being divided and given to the Persians, Belshazzar would have seen that. He would have said, oh, look, there's the word. He's using it in the one sense for my kingdom is divided, but then he's also telling me, look at the hand that wrote this on my wall is also saying there's Persians outside the gates. Your kingdom's been divided, and guess what? They're going to have it. It's going to be theirs. And so that's another little fascinating thing about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are also different weights, and so some people have said, oh well, one represents Nebedcunezzer, one represents, so the value of value goes down with each. Mm-hmm. But the other interesting thing is in the Masoretic text and in the Greek text, the words are not in the same order.
Okay.
So that's one thing that's kind of interesting about it. But one scholar I read translated it something to the effect of, you've been weighed in all the different ways, and you still come up a lightweight.
I love that. And I don't love that for him, but
but it works with your whole boxer theme, though.
Sure does. It sure does. So we kind of delved a little bit into that, and feel free to do your own diving into this. I think it's we've given you a place to start and to look, and
it's fun.
Study. It's interesting. The Bible says study to show yourself approved. So hope you have some fun with that if it's something that catches your interest and you feel like would enrich your spiritual life or just maybe your academic life. So let's go ahead and go to a couple questions that we had. I think we answered most of the questions during the question and answer period. So if you want to hear the answers to all the questions, go back and check out our question and answer period that we did after first service and that we did after second service. And I'm going to get to Nate's question that he sent in. He says, in Revelation, the number 3 often symbolizes the wholeness of God. The number 4 often refers to the whole earth, 4 winds in Revelation, so the northeast, southwest, so on and so forth. In light of the idea of God's dominion, could this reference to 7 periods of time, 3 plus 4, reflect a statement by God being the complete whole and the only God over the whole earth? And I think this is actually going maybe back to last week's sermon, the 7 periods that Nebedcunezzer was going to be insane. And so could that be, Nate? I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, it could be.
Hey.
I think that's an interesting theory, and I think that...
you lost me at 7 plus 4.
7 plus 4?
No.
There's
just
3
kidding.
plus 4.
3 plus 4.
Yeah. So there was the, number 3 of wholeness of God and the 4 of the... So there you go. Anyway, I think that's interesting, Nate. I say, I think I wish I'd thought of this. We should have had Nate come in and be a part of the podcast today.
Yeah.
I know where he works. I could have
just
said,
abducted him and dragged him
we
across the street.
Why not? Why not do that? That's what I
Next
say.
time.
Next time. We're coming for you, Nate. Watch out. All right. So that is, I think, most of what we had to talk about today when it comes to this. I hope that you've enjoyed delving a little bit deeper. Lucas, Melanie, am I leaving anything out? I'm not the regular host here, so I have a... I might forget some
Well,
things.
what do we have upcoming?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Upcoming stuff, yes.
Yes.
Lucas, what do we have upcoming?
We have the Den.
The Den.
Yes.
I'm excited for that one.
The Den.
It will be the last one for the series.
The last one for the series.
The final one. One more boxing quote.
And we will take the question mark of Darius the Mede, and we will put him in action.
And after that, we have Christmas.
That's right.
We do. And that reminds me that I received a text message from Carolina Dave, who wanted me to be sure to tell Randy that he stands in solidarity with him in regards to Christmas and sends a very hearty bah humbug his way. So if you're not sure what we're talking about, there was a video that we showed at the end of our church service where we are going to be the point of the video is that we're going to be doing decorating our church for Christmas next week on Monday and Tuesday, 4 o'clock decorating party.
Which is right before Thanksgiving.
Yes, right before, which is, in Randy's opinion, you cannot decorate before the day is passed.
Yeah.
And yet we still have to have the church decorated for that first Sabbath after Thanksgiving.
And nobody wants to come out and do it on Black Friday.
No, oddly enough.
Ask me how I know last year.
Yeah. That's. And can we just say a big thank you to Gabby Parente?
Yes.
Last year she came up to me and very kindly and gently said, "Hey, feels like the decorating of the church isn't, maybe happening on the scale that some of us would love to see it happening on." To which I said, I am guilty. You're right. I maybe joined Carolina Dave and Randy a little bit on the bah humbug scale somewhere. I like Christmas, so don't get too upset about it. I just, I sometimes feel like it's a little over. I lost a little bit of my passion working at the Disney store during the Christmas season in retail. And I love Disney. The people that would come in, the guests, would sometimes, in my opinion, not understand the true spirit of Christmas.
I think that's something you can maybe work through in therapy, though.
Yeah, I've got so many other issues I have to go through first. So maybe we'll get there. I don't know. But anyway.
Gabby is writing to our rescue this year.
Yes, Gabby came in and said, I love decorating for Christmas. And I said, well, if you love it, are you willing to come in? She said, I will do it. Yeah, so Gabby hasn't just decided to do, she's actually done drawings. She has a whole like palette of things. It's pretty cool. She has it really well planned out. So if you come in next Monday or Tuesday, if you're in a different state or country and you want to fly in, spend your mornings at one of our many fabulous theme parks and then come around 4:00 for decorations, you're more than welcome to do that. But for those of us here in town, 4:00, many hands make light work. My hope is maybe if we go 4:00 on Monday, maybe we have so many people that it's just all done and that Tuesday doesn't even become necessary. But
and also I heard a rumor
that
Randy's going to put on Christmas music and is going to be making fancy coffee.
Yes.
So if you weren't necessarily in the Christmas spirit, but you really like fancy coffee, that
I wonder
might
if
be
there's
a
anybody
draw.
who makes good Christmas cookies that we could have.
I feel like that would be an important ministry.
That would be a very good.
Alex.
Reach out.
Oh yeah. Oh, Alex.
Well, and I'm sure many people could contribute if they wanted to, bringing your best Christmas cookie to our. Maybe that would be a fun tradition to start. And I'm the worst at starting traditions that never continue, but it would be a fun tradition on church Christmas decoration night to have like Christmas cookies and Randy's special brew.
That sounds awesome.
I love that.
Well, we'll have to see whether we can pull that tradition off or not. But that's what's coming up. And so looking forward to that. We got a Christmas series. Melanie, tell them a little bit really quick about what's happening for our Christmas series.
Well, the Christmas series is called, did we decide we were calling it Origin?
Origin.
So we're going to talk about
Origin
story.
or origins?
I don't know. That's the question. Are we putting an S on the end of it?
What do you think, Lucas?
I think we should put an S at the
All
end
right.
of it.
That's where I lean to. Origins.
Yeah.
Origins. All right. So we're going to be talking about story. Everybody's got a story.
Everybody has a story, and everybody
What's
has a starting place, and oftentimes the end is the beginning. So,
Wow.
Dun, dun, dun.
dun, dun, dun. We're showing up for. We hope so. So we have a lot of great stuff going on. And you know what, folks? Thank you so much for your support of Whole Life. Thanks for listening to this podcast, for taking the time to be a part of this. I like to think that you do it because you find value there, and it's helping you grow in Jesus. And so that's my prayer for you. I hope you have a fabulous week, and we will catch you next week when Randy is back to do this thing the right way.
Have a good week.